Today's video is going to be very different, and I'm sure to many of you it's going to come as a surprise, but a welcome one, because we are not talking about the Old Republic in any capacity today. We're going to be talking about post-Return of the Jedi EU, or more specifically the New Jedi Order series of books, and Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is one of the great heroes of modern storytelling, and many of us grew up with Luke. We saw him as an unwavering hero who went above and beyond to do the right thing, and he was somebody that many of us idolized. Now, regardless of what happened to Luke in the movies, he went down a very different path in the comics, the books, and all of the expanded universe stories. The Luke Skywalker that we knew from these stories was the one that I think continued from the legend of Return of the Jedi. He went on to do incredible things, and as many of us know, he went on to become one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful Jedi in Star Wars history. And if you've ever had a discussion about Luke Skywalker, or his power scaling as people call it in the community, he is often right up there at the top with some of the most ridiculous feats seen in the Star Wars universe. However, there is one specific thing that Luke Skywalker does that is always brought up in these discussions. If you watched a video I made a few months ago about Starkiller, where I spoke about how his pulling down of a Star Destroyer was a huge misconception, well, this video is going to have a similar kind of vibe, just with Luke instead. If you've watched YouTube videos of Luke Skywalker or read articles and blogs about things that he's done, the one big thing that will always stand out and always be brought up as his pinnacle of power was his moving or manipulation of a black hole. People will take this statement and they will use it as the be-all and end-all of what Luke Skywalker could achieve with the Force. However, this entire scenario is greatly taken out of context by many Star Wars content creators, and by people that just talk about Luke Skywalker in general, just because of how cool it does sound. And the reality is, Luke Skywalker never truly moved or manipulated a literal black hole. And it's one thing I've noticed in the Star Wars community, being the idea that Luke moved a literal black hole, one of the most powerful natural phenomena in the universe, is just now regurgitated as fact without the actual truth behind the story. So, where exactly does the idea that Luke manipulated a black hole come from anyway? Well, it all stems from the book released in 2000 known as the New Jedi Order Dark Tide 1 Onslaught. This entire series of books, the New Jedi Order, depicts Luke Skywalker, Mara Jade, as well as Leia's children, Jason, Jaina, and Anakin, etc., and it focused mainly around the invasion of the Yuuzhan Vong. Now, the idea of Luke manipulating a black hole occurs during a battle on the planet Dantooine, and the Yuuzhan Vong sent a huge force of Chazrak, lizard-like creatures, to attack a refugee camp on the planet. Now, the sheer size of this force was totally overwhelming the rebel base, and they were only able to fight back when Luke Skywalker discovered that these creatures were controlled by something known as a Thrall Herder. And the general plan was that they destroy the Thrall Herder and create some kind of opening in the Yuuzhan Vong defense, which they could then use to fight back and potentially escape. However, these Thrall Herders were protected by things known as Dovin Bassals, and this is where a huge misconception comes in regarding black holes. Dovin Bassals created gravitational anomalies. These gravitational anomalies could then be used to propel starships if there was enough of them, and they could also be used as a defense mechanism to essentially absorb energy. And because of that absorption of energy in the kind of void-like space, what the Dovin Bassals create is often described as in the book as a mini black hole, because it acts somewhat similarly to them. However, don't let the description of a black hole when it comes to describing Dovin Bassals confuse you. Because these gravitational anomalies are not black holes in the sense of what we know black holes to be, and they do not have the same energy output or the same power of a black hole in any way, shape or form. The void that the Dovin Bassal creates is described in the books many times as something that could easily be overwhelmed by laser fire from an X-Wing, proton torpedoes from X-Wings, and it even struggles to suck in an X-Wing in general, and so here is a quote from the books. Fire blossomed from the X-Scepter's nose as a proton torpedo squirted out. Jaina bounced her ship up after the launch and gained a bit of altitude. Below her, the torpedo streaked straight at the first moving mountain shadow, then it exploded into a brilliant silvery ball that lit up the night. The X-Wing's canopy flash suppressor engaged immediately, cutting out most of the glare but still allowing her to see what was going on at the point of attack. The torpedo had detonated shy of the target by about 100 meters, and a void had gobbled up a lot of the energy, but what little it didn't consume wrought havoc on the ground. So the combination of a proton torpedo and the laser fire of an X-Wing was enough to totally overwhelm a Dovin Bassal's gravitational void to the point where it couldn't consume any more energy, and it simply let the rest through to destroy whatever was behind it. Now, come on, let's think about this for a moment, because would that have ever happened to an actual black hole? Absolutely not. Dovin Bassals simulate a black hole to a tiny extent, but they're not actually anywhere near the equivalent of one. It's like comparing the firepower of a firecracker to a billion nuclear bombs. They are not the same, and so it would be silly to compare them in general. And the thing is, people are always leaving out the context of this when it comes to the black hole of a Dovin Bassal, because it's so much easier to say that Luke Skywalker manipulated a black hole than manipulated a gravitational void that could be overwhelmed by some laser fire. Now, essentially what Luke then does is he grabs a hold of this tiny little void that the Yuuzhan Vong create with Dovin Bassals, and he essentially tricks the Yuuzhan Vong, and he has this void collide with the Thrall Herder, and the Thrall Herder is then sucked up into the void, and now they have a massive advantage in the battle. Just moving this tiny gravitational anomaly wipes Luke out, to the point where he literally just drops unconscious. And I quote again from the book, "The void crashed into the vehicle, striking it in mid-spine. The long vehicle bent backward as both ends became sucked into the black hole. It flowed like thick liquid, all the sharp horns and bony plates becoming fluid as they curved up over the void's event horizon. In less than an eye blink, the vehicle had been consumed by the void, leaving a huge gap in the Yuuzhan Vong formation." Luke stared at the Kamasi for a moment, trying to reply, but a wave of exhaustion crested over him and eroded his ability to think. He shook his head, then slumped back in the chair. The force energy he had used to help the Yuuzhan Vong destroy themselves had drained out of him completely, leaving him limp and barely able to keep his eyes open, before the world closed in on him, tight and black. Now, Dovin Bassals do generally have different levels of scale. Some of them were smaller and some of them were bigger. There were some instances where the voids created did have huge levels of power, but we're not going to talk about them because the specific voids created for this specific scenario were essentially tiny microscopic black holes, gravitational anomalies, something similar to an interdictor cruiser but on a very smaller scale, and really they weren't anything significant in the grand scheme of power. And just for comparison, the force feat of Kip Joron pulling the entire Suncrusher out of Yavin Prime and all the way to Yavin 4 with the help of Exar Kun was a far more significant feat in terms of raw power, and yet nobody seems to talk about that because the word black hole isn't flung around like some kind of gimmick. Luke Skywalker has done some incredible things in Star Wars in general, especially in the expanded universe. But the truth is, this specific feat is widely blown out of proportion, much like Starkiller's pulling down of a Star Destroyer, and even though that was blown out of proportion too, I actually think what Starkiller did by holding the Star Destroyer in place was actually a bigger feat than what Luke does here, but you know, that's certainly debatable. But now you know, Luke Skywalker did not manipulate a black hole in the conventional sense, and that people use this description as a gimmick to try and propel Luke in the eyes of whoever they're discussing him with. Now, I usually don't delve into these kind of stories post-Return of the Jedi, and I know there's a lot of you that want me to do more videos like this, and I'm trying to figure my way into this kind of era of Star Wars. And I'm curious to know, is there anything in particular that you want to see me cover that isn't Old Republic related? Let me know down in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button, it helps me out a great deal, and if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.